Hello, folks. It's CDM for December 2021. Looks like we've got enough folks to get started, so we can dive into the first topic around tracing in RGW and how to deploy those kinds of tools. So, I don't know, is this Omri and Casey? You want to kick it off?
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Omri and I'm an intern in the RGW team. And I'm going to talk about the tracing in Ceph and particularly in the RGW. Well, so I want to give you some background and context. We are using the Jaeger the Jaeger project as our tracing backend, and Open Telemetry as our client, which is used to send traces to the Jaeger backend. We have a thing that's called trace, and that is consists of span, and span can have tags for identification and searching later the specific trace, and the log for an extra data. So let's talk our current work in the tracing. We have created a tracer class using the Open Telemetry client SDK. We moved from Open Telemetry to from Open Tracing to Open Telemetry. The Open Tracing library, more specifically the CPP library of Open Tracing, has no maintainer. So the Open Telemetry library is a new one with active changes, and also supports the Jaeger backend. And our tracer class is used inside the RGW and the OSD right now. I'm currently working on the RGW part, and we are able to create a new trace to add child spans to an existing trace, and we also can enable the tracing at runtime. We want it to be disabled by default, and we also can serialize and deserialize trace info in order to unify spans into a single trace that represent, for example, a single operation in the RGW. Here's an example of the Jaeger UI. We can see here the 11 traces, which with each trace is the operation in the RGW, and the trace name consists of the operation name and some unique transaction ID. Okay, so let's talk about the actual traces that we already have in the RGW. Every user request in the RGW is being traced. We currently have a basic spans in each trace that represent a user request. We have three spans: one for the verify permission, and one for the trace and one for the verified permission, and the third one is for the execute method of the operation. And we have tags on this trace that can be used to identify the trace. For example, like a bucket name or object ID. And the second traces that we have is trace for the multi-port upload operation, which is trace that unifies the several operations. I mean the subsequent operations to a single trace. We can see here an example of the multi-port upload trace that has two port object operation and eventually the complete multi-port operation, which can be done on different RDWs. And we can support it with the serialization of the trace info and deserialize it and build an object called span context. We are currently working on performance testing. We want to compare several approaches. We want to compare when the tracing is compiled out and versus tracing compiled in and disabled, which is the default state. We also want to compare when the tracing is disabled and versus tracing enabled, which is when most of the runtime cost is happening in the tracing. And we also want to deploy the Jaeger components along with Ceph. We still need to integrate with Ceph ADM to make it deploy the Jaeger containers. If tracing is if we want it. I mean, it's not supposed to deploy it in any always, just if you pass some flag to it. And Jaeger also supports Rook deployment. They have an operator, and we decided with the Rook maintainers to document the process of installing the Jaeger operator and deploying the Jaeger CR, and not add some code to the Rook operator to the Rook operator to include to install the Jaeger operator by itself. And they have some abilities to configure the Jaeger components to configure the Ceph cluster to communicate with the Jaeger operator, with the Jaeger pods. So adding code to the Rook is currently unnecessary. And our future plans in terms of tracing is conditional tracing. We would like to able to enable tracing in specific cases. For example, trace only a specific bucket or things that the user can decide, and not just tracing all over the options. Multi-site tracing, which is as I see it, very we can we can learn from it from multi-site tracing since it's very hard to debug it. And we also want to make traces, integrated trace for the RGW and the OSD, like an end-to-end trace from the start of the operation until the OSD operations. And that's all. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm here.
Omri, this looks great. I was just curious. What did you mean by serialize and deserializing the traces? How do we make use of them?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Like in the starting, you covered serializing and deserializing the traces. I didn't get them. Can you kind of explain a bit about it?
The span, we have the span context that consists of span ID, trace ID, and flex. So I implemented a function to write it to a buffer list. We're using it in the multi-part upload of a trace. Since
that was my second, like how multi-part uploading is even I'm not much familiar with multi-part upload trace. So yeah, how do you make use of them?
we're saving the trace, the serialized span context in meta object when we create the upload object, the actual upload, and when we read, when we want to upload a part of it, we read the upload object, and from it the meta object, and we take those span ID, trace ID, and flex and convert it to a span context, which is used in the add span method of the tracer class.
Okay, so it's like deconstructing the trace and then using that context to continue the trace.
Yeah, exactly.
It is stored.
Yeah,
just
you would
make sure. Yeah, it is stored in an attribute as part of the object. So it doesn't matter whether the second operation happens on the same RGW or different RGW. Whenever you read it from Rados, you get the serialized span. So you take it, if you find it there, you deserialize it, and you continue your trace from there.
Okay. So in open tracing, we had extract and inject method that was kind of storing the context and then using using that context again, continuing the span generation at the other end. Is it similar to that?
The extract function is RGW related. It's not related to the common tracer, but I think it's supposed to be the same.
I think
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I said for the RGW and OSD, like tracing, if you want to have this unified tracing across RGW and OSD, then we would have to to serialize the information into somewhere in Rados and just send it to the OSD. And when the OSD would get the command, the Rados command from the RGW, it would look for this extra piece of information in the payload. And if it finds it there, then it would reconstruct the trace and continue the tracing. So that on the back end in Jaeger, you can see that it was one huge trace with some spans that are on the RGW and some spans that are on the OSD.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay, that clarifies my doubt. Yeah, I think even open tracing, we having these two methods which were similar to the deserializing and serializing that we are doing here.
Yeah.
So
the open tracing had the same functionality as well. I don't think we used it though in open tracing, but it
yeah,
has those
we don't use it currently, and like even I'm not much familiar with open telemetry. Do they have that feature or not? So yeah, good to know that we have something pieced out. And like multi-path traces, has it been worked out? It's not yet merged and still work in progress. You are testing. How can you cover a bit about that as well?
Sorry, about what?
The you are using deserializing and serialization in multi-part tracing, if I understood correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it also cross-boundary system like RGW and OSD?
It's supposed to write in the span context into a buffer list. I'm not sure if the OSD uses the same buffer list, or I mean not the same buffer list. I mean the same data structure to serialize objects, but
I do believe that eventually when we do pass spans from Liberados clients into the OSD, they would use the same serialize and deserialize methods that you're using in multi-part.
Okay, so is it right now RGW only code, or is it a common tracer code?
It's the common tracer. We already made this change before the migration to OpenTelemetry, but it's common. It's common code. So the new OpenTelemetry code is already running in the OSD with the existing stuff. Now, regardless of serialization and those things, but the OpenTelemetry is already in the OSD.
Great, good to know.
Yeah, just maybe one small comment on the multipart. Multipart does cross boundaries, but it crosses boundaries between different RGWs or the same RGW in different iterations, but not between the RGW and the OSD. But it does cross the boundary, because this is why we need the serialize and deserialize into the object attribute.
And have you tested it in multiple nodes, or right now the dev cluster is limited to one personal work environment? I'm asking from a deployment purpose, because I have not tested in multi-node till now.
I don't think we tested it. We didn't test. We were just testing it with vstart. I think that Omri is working on Ceph ADM integration, and once we have that, I mean, I guess we can test that manually on multiple nodes. Even now, you just need to go and set up things manually. But once we have Ceph ADM integration, then you can set up the agents and collectors and the backend on whatever setup that you have. And this is also true for Rook. For Rook, it will be, again, well, not exactly manual, but just be, you should follow some documentation, and then the OpenShift or Kubernetes, that underlying infrastructure will take care of running all the agents and collectors and everything in place.
Mhm. And any like difficulty you faced in while working on the traces? Because from the past, I remember that there were cases where having two parent traces, that was leading to a deadlock condition, and I don't particularly remember, but we stick to having only one parent in the whole scope for individual trace. Have you were you able to produce multiple traces in the same scope, or is it still a thing?
Do you mean the scope of the Open Telemetry, or I mean when we
Trace.
create a trace, we're passing some property of parent span. So I don't understand how span can have multiple parents.
Maybe yeah. So like I just wanted to ask, you were able to have multiple traces while dealing with the same scope.
Yeah, I mean, this is how the multipart is working. So we have tracing for each and every operation, let's say a put or a multipart init or a multipart end, and those are like transactional traces. They start with the transaction start and they end with the transaction end. And we have the complete multipart trace, which starts with the multipart init and then go through all the puts of the multipart and then ends in the multipart complete. And we have them running in parallel. So in the same time, you would see a trace, oh, it's a trace for a put, a transactional trace for the put, but this same put operation is also part of a much longer trace, which describes the multipart from the init through all the different puts until the complete. And I don't know, Omri, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you ran into issues with this.
You're right.
Great. Sounds good. Cool. Yep, I can think of these things out of my mind. Anybody else have anything to ask?
I guess just a question about this Ceph Idiom integration work. Have we thought about how to design that and who's going to work on it?
The design of what? Sorry?
The deployment part of the containers for Ceph Idiom.
I'm currently working on it. I don't understand. I don't think I understand your questions correctly. I mean,
So I think that Omri
I think
already
that answers
started
it.
with the. Sorry. Sorry, Casey.
Please go ahead, Robert.
I said Omri started to work on the Ceph Idiom integration.
That's great.
Yeah. And for Rook, there won't be any actual code going in. It will be just documentation inside the Rook manual for deployment with tracing.
So just to mention, is there like have you guys thought about the design of Ceph Idiom? based deployment. Last I was working a bit on it, and like I was thinking of having different daemons and deploying it as sidecars. Similar way we have the systemd units for other Ceph components, but anything specific that you have thought about, or is it still even a plan for future?
Yeah, it's the deployment via Ceph Idiom is I mean, Ceph Idiom has some options to deploy Prometheus, which is similar to tracing to Jaeger, and in the Ceph Idiom they have some services that like that outside of the core of Ceph, like external services, and we will deploy it in the same way like the Prometheus. I mean, it's supposed to be a service that can that the manager can identify and know that is running or not running, and it's supposed to be a proper integration between with the Jaeger components, the Jaeger containers.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Andre, I have a question for you. Have you thought about making these metrics, some of these measures available to the users? For example, via the server timing HTTP API. Not sure if you are familiar with that, but you can add some headers.
Not so.
Okay. So just for you to know, I think that's I'm currently exploring that for the dashboard. I think it's pretty useful, only for debugging tracing purposes. So probably it should be disabled the rest of the time, but at least you want to debug or get some profiling or some tracing that might help.
So I'm not sure that we need to do that. I mean, this is probably something you can do from the Elasticsearch backend. Like this is what Jaeger are using. They're using Elasticsearch. So, I mean, if you write the correct queries there, you should probably be good to extract the data.
Okay. Yeah, the benefit of this is that the major browsers provide this UI. So basically, it's just access the object or wherever, and you will get these graphs. So you don't need any other tool for doing that. I mean, from a user perspective, it's really useful.
I think we would just need to embed the link for the query, and the Jaeger UI generally takes care of these. So we can display them, some of these metrics consistently dashboard as well.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, please. Does it make sense to anonymize some of these metrics and have them being sent through our telemetry module as well?
I don't think it's related to the I mean the tracing has some I mean it's not like metrics, it's like I'm not sure it's related to the telemetry library.
The main metric that could be extracted from the traces are the latencies, or when the time it takes to perform operations. Those are like the metric information. The other information from there is like more debugging information. The tags and the logs is more like you get a very nice long log record that can hop multiple daemons and cross time and stuff like that. So those are like the two functions. But from kind of latency calculation perspective, I think this could be very valuable. It's also related to what Nesta said. So we probably should think about that. It's all in the Elasticsearch backend, so there probably is a possible way to fetch it from there and store it in places where they show graphs and so on.
Mm-hmm. Are the slides available somewhere? I'm sorry, I missed the first part of it.
Yeah, I'll send it.
Thanks.
One good thing to know about tracing would be like these traces that we see in maybe in remote system, we can have them in JSON format, and then we can have them rendered it UI using Jaeger UI deployed at our system. So all the details and timestamps and everything would be intact, and we can have them easily portable. So yeah, I really like that feature. Should come handy.
Anything else on tracing? All right, well, thank you, Omri. Great discussion and good presentation. Next topic is around storing secrets potentially in the monitor. Sebastian, I think you wanted to bring this one up.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So, there is a pull request that adds the ability to store the SSH password, the SSH key password within the config key store. And I'm slightly worried that this might not be a good idea. And I'm looking for ideas, basically, right? I'm looking for ideas how to store things like the SSH key password in a proper way. And we can, of course, store the SSH password in the config key database, but I'm not feeling so well about that possibility, honestly. What can we do about it? I mean, we could encrypt the Mon database. That's one idea. With a static key. Does it really solve issues? I don't know. We could try to hook up Vault into the manager. Would that be a good idea? I don't know. We could try to enable the SSH agent in the manager containers. Would that be a good idea? I don't know. I'm looking for inputs from our group here.
So a little
What
context
do
would
we
help.
do with?
Yeah, where are we using SSH that we weren't before?
So Ceph Idiom uses SSH, and right now there is a requirement that the SSH key that is used to call to establish SSH connections to remote hosts does not have a password. Yeah, and this particular pull request adds the ability to have password protected SSH keys, which in itself is a good idea. But we are storing the unencrypted SSH key alongside the SSH key password.
This does have a parallel with the where we store the encryption keys for the OSDs. They're also stored in the monitors after using at-rest encryption. And I think we're kind of assuming that if users are concerned about the security of those keys, they're using full disk encryption on the monitors, since the monitors don't have a control over their own block device or anything like that.
I mean, if that's enough, then I would be good, right? Can we verify it that this on-rest encryption for the MON database is enabled?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how easy it is to do.
I don't think it's visible to us.
Yeah, you'd also have to require that all monitors have it before you can use it globally.
And this is a little more sensitive than a deencrypt key, but I'm also not sure that it matters.
This SSH key is having root access to the work cluster.
Similarly, if you have access to like the Ceph admin key, you can do anything with the data in the cluster. It's a kind of similar level of risk.
Yep. I mean, Sage, if I remember correctly, you were pretty much okay with just storing things in the config key database, right?
I think you're muted.
All right. Yeah, I mean, the monitor is the root of trust, and so it kind of is what it is. I think at some level the monitor has to have that key. I think the question is like making sure that the monitor stores it in a way that doesn't introduce like the opportunity for users to accidentally expose it. So I think I wouldn't, and I'm not a security expert here, but I wouldn't worry about things like encrypting the monitor database because you have to decrypt it, and the key for that is going to be readable by the root user, and the monitor database is also owned by the root user and not readable by world, and so whatever, it's all the same. On the other hand, if you do Ceph config key dump, then it'll dump out a whole bunch of stuff that includes secrets. So that is like, we want to make sure that people don't accidentally expose that information and understand that config key is potentially sensitive. There is sort of a weird kludge that we added a couple years ago where if you have a monitor capability and you do allow R, meaning allow read access, that used to include reading everything in config key. We changed that, and so you can't read config key unless you have the star permission. You have to have allow star, which is only the admin user. So all the other daemons normally only have allow R and then like a specific profile that has specific subcommands or whatever. Maybe can read specific subsets of that. And so only client admin generally has access to read all of config key, and so that sort of cordons it off. But I think the danger is that config key doesn't sound sensitive, and so users might not realize that it may contain sensitive information. In the same way that, like in Kubernetes, there's something called a secret store that probably functionally has similar parameters around access, but it's called a secret store, and so people understand purpose, behave accordingly. So.
Can we just prefix things in the config key store with maybe secret and then treat them differently by not dumping them in general?
Maybe.
I remember we had a similar discussion with the Niha, you probably will remember this, with the logging of the Ceph key, the Ceph config key set and commands, right? So those were basically printed in the log, so we were printing also the secrets. So we were talking about
Yes.
some flags or some way to distinguish.
Yes. Yes. And this is not the first time that this kind of issue has come up. So if you have some sort of flag or some sort of distinction where config dump, etc., doesn't show everything, that'd be a good solution for future keys like this.
But
I
what
mean,
are
we
the
could.
semantics that were, what's the distinction there? Like if we had the admin user, they're still able to dump everything some way, right? And we're already disallowing non-admin users from dumping this.
One option might be to just create an arbitrarily different namespace called the secret store that works exactly like config key and might even have the same set of permissions, but it's just not called config key, it's called secrets. So you could do Ceph secrets dump, and it would dump all the secrets. And then we adjust things to store them under that. It's just a identical, but not whatever, equivalent but separate namespace. That might be helpful.
Have you encountered a problem with users actually dumping this by accident in the past?
I don't know.
And sorry, go ahead.
At least if they are dumping the secrets, they know that they dumped the secrets.
Yeah, I think that would. People see log messages go by that say config key this, config key that, and they don't think twice because they don't realize that might contain sensitive information.
No, I think that was the BZ. That was a security issue that we were dumping sensitive information in the logs, so we had to remove a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
Especially like values to keys. That's where the problem was. We are not dumping values. Yeah, go ahead.
As a practical matter, the get and the set commands can either take the new value or return the value as or they can set the value rather either as an argument in the command or as the like standard in type payload. And so I think the practical step that we need to make sure is whenever we're setting a secret, we pass the secret via the standard in so it doesn't get logged. Those two as an argument. If we made a separate command that's like secret set in a separate namespace, we could like not have it be possible to pass it as an argument.
At least that would make it possible for us to kind of distinguish between calls to config key and calls to the secret store.
Yeah.
When it comes to logging and so on. And I think it's also a problem for us developers that we always have to be aware that the config key is actually also a secret store for us, which is, I don't think everyone notices. I don't think everyone knows that or has it in mind every time it works with the config key store. So yeah, it would work.
I think that the problem is that there's going to be just a whole bunch of like boilerplate code that gets basically duplicated for like an identical set of commands. A bunch of things have to get changed, a bunch of stuff gets moved. Overhead associated with it, but might be worth it.
Yeah, and
why don't we just not dump the content of the key and just access the content of the key if we get the key? So if you do config dump, then you see like a bunch of stars for those sensitive values. But if you get the key in particular, then you get the value. If you're afraid of just dumping everything and exposing sensitive data.
I mean, I suppose as a practical matter, the dump command is only used by like developers probably. We're like sifting through information, so we can just like get rid of it. But it is pretty useful. I don't know.
I think config key dump is too useful in order to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Especially for understanding deeply hidden Ceph idiom issues. If there is something weird with the data structures, then you could ask the user to just run a config dump manager Ceph idiom. Right? But that's not going to be a good idea as long as we are storing secrets in the config key.
Yep. Yep.
Is
Instead
the main
of getting rid
exposure?
of it, oh, I was just saying,
Go ahead, Laura.
instead of getting rid of it, implementing another option like Ceph config dump key sanitized, like another flag or another parameter in that command, so that there's a dump option, but then there's also a filter dump option. Just an idea.
Then we need to know which keys are secrets and which ones aren't, which I think is sort of functionally very similar to having a separate namespace for the secrets. Right now, it just stores arbitrary data, so we don't know what any of it means.
So it would be really hard to, or it would be difficult to filter things out like that. Hard coding a solution for that. I see.
So we could use a separate namespace and then filter things out of the dump command if that's the main part that we're worried about, and not need to duplicate all the boilerplate for adding like new secret store commands or something like that. Is the dump command the only place we're worried about, really?
And also the set command passing the value as an argument as opposed to an input.
Yeah, I guess that's on the CLI, really. If you're using the CLI.
Well, it shows up on all the logs because when a manager module, for example, issues a command to set a secret, it triggers a command that shows up in the logs.
I thought that was part of when they addressed with not logging those values in the first place.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, let's fix it.
But then that's a very stopgap solution. It's very easy for somebody in future to introduce something new and go log it somewhere. I mean, currently the code has explicit comments about why this has been removed, but we cannot rely just on that. So having something more foolproof will eventually is probably not a bad idea.
Yeah. The current config key has like a somewhat of a structure that's carved up hierarchically. And so, like, for example, all the manager module stuff is sort of private within the manager /module name, sub namespace or whatever. And so if we like carved off another namespace that's like secret, prefix with secret, then it would complicate that hierarchy. I guess I would lean towards having a totally separate thing that isn't config key, but implemented similarly. I can put it on the Trello board.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like we have a couple of options to implement it, but for now, Sebastian, it seems like this isn't any worse than what we're doing with other kinds of secret keys.
We are typically not storing the root key, SSH key, password. So we are storing the SSH key, but you're not storing the SSH key password. And I'm worried that someone is using his private key for it and then accidentally exposing his private key plus password. So for now, I don't know if that's a good idea to merge this pull request as it is right now. I would rather wait until we have something in place for this particular use case, because the SSH key password is something pretty secure in general.
I mean, the SSH key is already there, right? It's no different than the key, right?
It's deceiving. If you're using a password for that key, then you would expect the password to be a bit more secure than the key itself, which is not the case.
We should adjust that expectation. Like, I mean, maybe this is going back to the result for request. So they have they generated an SSH key pair with a passphrase. They want that they want to use.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to ask him. I'm going to ask him.
Yeah.
If he's aware that if he stores it there, and then it's not not a bit more secure than having an SSH key with a password.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we do merge it, then in the documentation that explains that you can do this should be very clear that they're stored in the same place. Key and the passphrase that goes with it. So. Okay.
Cool. Sounds like that covers it for that topic. Next one is around detecting inactive or out-of-date communications with monitors. Ernesto, do you want to bring this one up? Or maybe Alfonso?
Yeah, this is going to be presented by Pere. So Pere, if you want to go with that. But I mean, just the context, I think this has been discussed previously. So basically, we got reports from situations where at least three monitor cluster, two of the monitors come down or unresponsive or whatever. Basically, from the manager, that everything will feel like the cluster is going on, is running, right? Because as per probably you may more or less explain this with more detail, but we will still receive reports, monitor reports and signals that are actually or falsely indicating that the cluster is still healthy. So, Pere, it's all yours if you want to go with that.
Okay. So, well, if anyone is wondering about the tracker, this is the one that we are talking about. There is a PR in that tracker. But as Ernesto said, when you have, for example, 3 monitors and you kill 2 of them, the last one hangs and won't respond to any command. But from the manager side, we still see messages coming from the monitor. And the problem here is that the dashboard and Prometheus are displaying the wrong data. So that's a problem that we try to fix. And yeah, we think that the monitor should recover from this, obviously, but we went for a quick fix on this, which basically is when we receive a log message. Since we are still getting messages from the monitor, we get the last log message and we store the timestamp from this log. And yeah, if this timestamp is too far away, we notify the modules and just we stop the dashboard and the Prometheus basically. But I think that there should be another fix for this, like for example a heartbeat from the monitor to the manager, or we can ping from the manager to the monitor maybe. Also, the monitor shouldn't be sending messages to the manager. That's another thing. But yeah, overall, I think that the monitor should recover, right? And I don't have that much knowledge about the monitor, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess so. Eventually, this is quite a corner case, but the thing is that if it happens, all the data that you will get, at least in Prometheus and Grafana, will be completely misleading. because you will see the clusters in warn status rather than in error, and well, probably lots of stats will be totally misleading. So yeah, the thing is that very use here the log message as a kind of heartbeat, but the question is whether we can actually send a real heartbeat or some way to actually detect whether there's been the Mon cluster has actually been broken and there is no cluster out there.
I guess there may be two parts to this. One is like displaying some kind of state about the monitor's health when they're not in quorum, and the second is not getting out-of-date stats from monitors that aren't part of a quorum anymore. Is that right?
Could you repeat, please? You said that there is a health message or something.
I was asking about that because at least two components to this. One is not being able to see the dashboard when your monitors are out of quorum, what the status of the monitors are, and the second piece it sounds like is you're still getting updates from Prometheus and Grafana, and therefore that's the dashboard from the more monitors that are out of quorum, but they're sending you out of date information.
Yeah, that's right. We are trying to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
Well, if you see the PR when the monitor keeps sending outdated messages, we just kill the modules. Well, not kill, but stop them. You were saying, Ernesto?
No, I was just mentioning that the mechanism that you use for that, it's the notify hook, right? So basically,
yeah,
you're detecting that via notify event. Yeah, the thing is that the mon map and everything regarding the monitor in the manager is cached. So basically, we have a outdated picture of the cluster. So yeah, probably not sure if stopping sending messages or maybe having a TTL in the maps so we can detect whether they are outdated or something. So there are multiple ways of doing this, but yeah, is that. And we didn't want to break either the existing modules because probably lots. I mean, I don't think if the modules are prepared to this situation, so maybe yeah, breaking all the manager API in case that there's been the situation might cause a lot of fuss, and we don't want to do that. So basically, we just wanted to deal with the dashboard monitor situation, and yeah, not because well, I cannot. I don't want to imagine what this might happen. I mean, to the other modules, right? The autoscaler, or to basically return an exception or something in case that the mon quorum is not there.
So from so just so that I'm understanding this correctly, from the end user's perspective, what would if we just stop the dashboard module, or what do they see? Do they see the last status, or what is from their perspective what changes?
Right now we are showing just an error, and you cannot
just an error
through the dashboard. But yeah, just a draft right now.
And when the monitors do form quorum, let us say, it just automatically checks that last time it got a message from the mon manager had a communication, it'll start the dashboard again. That's how it works.
Yeah. If you get a new message and it's updated, you will start again receiving messages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the thing is that we are we are now using the timestamp of the last log message. That's and I'm not sure if that's, I mean, the correct mechanism.
That's the most, yeah.
The timestamp of the last log message you said?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is.
Yeah, basically, my approach was checking if there was some message with a timestamp or something, so that the logs had one. I used that.
What if the monitor's idle and isn't generating log messages?
Well, you still keep the last message from the log.
I mean, practically speaking, the only way to tell whether the monitors are still in quorum is to like regularly issue a message to the monitors. It seems like you should just have some loop somewhere that's just doing a stat thing, just refreshing the status. And if the status is stale, then pop up a box that says cluster not responding.
Like a ping, you said, from the manager to the monitor.
Yeah, or just be issuing like a mon command.
A quorum status or something. Yeah.
Yeah, or just a status. Has a bunch of other information that you probably want to be refreshing on a regular basis anyway. I mean, presumably you have some loop somewhere that's like, I guess you're not. You're getting that all from the manager.
I don't remember correctly, but I think that command will fail if you call it with a monitor hanging.
Yeah, it'll.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. So I think the simple workaround would just be to have some thread or loop in the dashboard that waits 5 seconds and then issues this status and then waits 5 seconds and does it again. And if you ever find that the most recent result that you got was more than however many seconds old, then stale. I can't remember I'm not sure if the manager has any notion of monitor liveness that it's paying attention to. It probably does with the beacons, but
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like these beacon messages that are exchanged between the mon and the manager. Is there any metadata that we can piggyback on or rely on to just see, okay, like something like a TTL?
yeah, if you probably look at it probably we do, because if I just have a command that tells you how old the last beacon response was, that would probably be pretty straightforward to add.
These days, like in the past, we had to go to the admin socket to figure out the quorum status if the ones weren't in quorum, right? But these days, with that being routed through accessible through tel, is it possible to use that or no?
I mean, maybe, but then you'd have to be like sending tel messages to all the monitors independently. I think having the manager just exposed to the Python modules how recently its beacon was acked by the monitor would be sufficient.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I guess beyond just detecting whether they're in quorum, it'd be useful for the dashboard to be able to show like these monitors are in quorum, these ones aren't.
Yeah, that's already displayed in using the mod map.
Okay.
So isn't the mod map regularly sent back to the manager? So I mean, can we rely on? Okay.
And I'm looking actually, and it looks like the beacon there's no reply. So the managers are sending beacons to the monitor, but the monitor doesn't send anything back to the manager. So that would be a change.
And these beacons are locked. So maybe that was the log that we were seeing, and that's why this worked. This is in the cluster log.
Yeah, these beacons are logged. Yes.
Okay. So that's why this was working actually. We were actually relying on the last log. So.
Yeah, and I guess the mod map helps when there is a quorum, but it doesn't help if there's no quorum because they won't be updated.
Yeah.
I think that's it from my side. I guess.
Okay, so
yeah, I guess I mean generally, we want to probably conclude something out of this, right? So I guess the motivation with which this PR has been opened is absolutely fair, and I think we should do something about it. Maybe give us some time to take a look at the manager beacon mechanism to see if there is something we can use there. If not, we can come up with something more minimal like this, what you have. But I'm just not sure about how reliable this solution is going to be. It's worth spending more time finding a better solution first. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Next topic is around Docker and Docker for our development environment.
And that's also Perez. So if you want to quickly explain the motivation and the current status of that one.
Okay. So some of you might know that we were developing a new development environment, and yeah, basically it's a Python script that runs Docker, a Docker container, and inside this Docker container we use Ceph Idiom to deploy another containers inside this container. And well, we've had some problems here. First, deploying us this was fixed, so that was nice. I think I had a talk with Sebastian and Sage and Adam King too. Well, but the problem here is that in my computer it works just fine, but Alfonso and some Avan and teammates of mine have been having a lot of trouble with this because of cgroups v2 and also because we are running this first container with privileges. So yeah, we are having problems with that, and this solution that we think will work is making the container run unprivileged. But this is a problem because we are running systemd into the container, and if we don't use the privilege flag, we have to manually mount all the folders needed for the systemd. And well, I can copy the paste so you can have more context on this. This is basically what you have to do to add the systemd manually. So yeah. There we can maybe use Podman for this, but I'm not sure. I haven't looked at it that much. Also, we wanted to know if it maybe was possible to add to the Ceph volume inventory loopback devices, so they are available there, and we can. So basically, at the end, we can run the dashboard CI test with loopback devices. We don't have to rely on a virtual machine. So yeah, this is basically the current status of the Docker in Docker. We are still having some trouble with it. In my computer works, but yeah, I would suggest if some of you can test it, but be careful with it because I think Alfonso crashed his computer with it. So, well, apart from this, I wanted to show you a demo, guys. So, okay, so here, this is the folder where we store the Docker in Docker development environment. We call it a box because we can. And yeah, the main command is this one, and basically this is a command what we use for everything. So the main, you can deploy a cluster with cluster start and like this, and you can specify the OSDs and also the host like this. And I already have a cluster running, so I don't want to mess that up. So basically, you can check the cluster running with this list command. And as you can see, there are two containers. The seed one is basically the one that holds the Ceph Idiom and all the other containers. And this one is just SSH servers, so we can deploy, well, so we can use them as hosts. And if we run this, we enter in the first container, this one. And here we can see that we have Ceph Idiom. And if we run the shell, you see that we have here a cluster running. And yeah, that's basically it. The main thing here is that we have Docker containers running inside the Docker container. Wait a second, I forgot about this one. Yeah, here you can see that we have these Docker containers running inside the seed. So yeah, that's basically a small demo. But well, also you can obviously kill the cluster. And also to create these OSDs, we use loopback devices. We create some logical volumes, and then we use them to deploy the OSDs. As you can see here, you can see that we deployed the OSDs with the Ceph org daemon OSD, and also we have this command in the box to deploy them faster. So yeah, I think that's all.
Nice, that looks quite easy to use. And is the idea that it uses an existing like Ceph container image? And for like the dashboard development purposes, I guess, like how do you make your local changes to the container images?
Yeah, we share the Ceph folder, this Ceph folder, and we share it in Ceph Idiom. So every time you change something, it will change in the dashboard. And if you run the I think, yeah, I killed the cluster. But anyway, when I run this, you can check also the IP of the seed. This one holds the dashboard, so you just have to type this IP and the port 8443, and you'll have the dashboard running with the development environment.
Yeah, this helps on the Python development, basically. We haven't thought yet about, C++, although I guess you would first need to, build a container, but maybe there might be a way to mount also other paths, not only the Python one. So yeah, this might also work. I guess that should, we should extend Ceph Idiom to mount also these other directories, but yeah, eventually this might also work with the rest of services and demos. So.
Cool. Yeah, the Python pieces are pretty useful as well, just for any kind of major plugin development at this point.
Well, I think, this looks pretty useful. That makes a lot of sense. I think the problem before was just that when the original pull request merged, it broke a bunch of stuff. So we need to make sure we don't break a bunch of stuff this time. But you mentioned that there were specific things that you're still blocked on. That was, I guess, loopback devices. You need Ceph-Lime to report.
Yeah, at the end, when I think that you made a pull request adding the no temp fs flag to LVM activate. So with that, it started working. And also I had to change the storage driver for Docker for it to work. I think it was part of the problem. I don't remember exactly. But the main problem, my concern here, is that if you run the Docker container with privileges on, there might be a lot of unexpected behavior. As I said before, for example, Alfonso had a problem where his computer shut off completely. So we don't want that, obviously.
Yeah.
So I guess that the solution should be running Docker container with rootless. But I wasn't able to do that right now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with
Yeah, the challenge here is running both a container inside a container and also systemd inside a container. So the mixture of these two things is kind of a challenge.
Yeah.
I saw some
Yeah.
presentations from Red Hat that with Podman, they are now able to do this also in rootless mode. Because in the past it also required privilege and root mode, but it seems like it's working in rootless now. So yeah,
I guess it feels to me like this is a path that is it's a road that like is gonna end at some point. Like the further down this road you get, the more these annoying issues you're gonna run into. I mean, the overall goal is to have an environment that is like a real cluster and is easy to work on and whatever. Then you can get all the same things with a single machine, at least with a single host, just by actually deploying Ceph ADM on your local machine instead of running it inside Docker.
Yeah, but
But then you can't have the multiple host part of it, right?
Yeah, I guess
think
the final goal would be to have something like vstart, but with Ceph ADM, a fully working Ceph ADM, and also be able to run vstart runner on top of that, so we could run tautology tests on vstart with Ceph ADM.
Yeah. I mean, there is a cstart command. I don't think anybody really uses it, but it basically just runs Ceph ADM. And it can and probably should be modified to have that magic argument that passes your source code directory into the container, so you can make running modifications. But that was the intention, to essentially replace or have an alternative to vstart that just uses a real Ceph ADM cluster running on your local machine. So that seems like challenge number one. I'd be curious, like, obviously the multiple host part is going to be a challenge, although probably you could run, but you could just start up some VMs on your local machine and then add those to your Ceph ADM cluster too. That might be an option.
Yeah, that's already working. We have this KCLI thing, which is basically a wraparound KVirt, and that's already working. But well, those are virtual machines, and we wanted to have lightweight containers. So
I think the other half of this is having things that look like real disks and behave like real disks, but aren't real disks. And I'm not sure that loopback devices are necessarily the best way to do it. They're sort of ignored by the volume for confusing reasons that I don't know exactly what they are. So I would be hesitant to just allow them without understanding why they were excluded in the first place. But the one thing I'll mention is an alternative to that is the Nvme loopback port in recent Linux kernels. Lets you create an Nvme device like dev Nvme n0 whatever it is, backed by a file. And those actually do behave exactly like a normal block device. The only way you can tell that they're not is that the vendor, instead of being, Seagate or whatever, is Linux. So like the vendor string looks different, but they look and behave like real devices. So that's what we started using for tautology, so that we can test all the orchestration features around creating a distributed.
And does this show in the inventory?
Yep. They look like real Nvme devices. The catch is that they're you need a pretty recent kernel. So, for example, Ubuntu 20.04 is not sufficient. You need to use the hardware enablement kernel, which is a little bit newer than that, but still supported or whatever. And they're slightly annoying to set up. Like the tooling, there's like some Python tool that somebody wrote, but it's like not available on Ubuntu. And so the tautology task that sets these up just fiddles in sysdev to do it manually, which is pretty tedious, but can be scripted. Has been scripted. I mean, I can point you to the tautology task for reference.
Also, I saw in test Ceph ADM in QA work units, there was something about Nvme loopback devices.
It's right here. What the topology test does is it takes all the LVs that are set up as scratch devices and it puts an Nvme loopback thing on top of it. So, but it's only a couple different steps of echoing various file numbers to have this kernel config stuff. Do it. Anyway.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about the that this is like proceeding and like the long-term goal of fixation, and that's what we're talking about, of having a real environment you can use for development that actually uses Ceph ADM in like just like a real user would, and behaves like a real deployment. I think we're close on the tautology side to being able to like run tests, like junior high scripts that he's written to set up like all the tautology services you need to run on your local machine. So I think the only missing piece there is adding support for adding worker nodes, like a worker VM or something, to be able to actually run the tests against your local container builds. So we're getting closer to being able to have that all being all dancing real user deployment, like we can actually test with all the kinds of tests we run at your local machine. All right, so the last topic is around the autoscaler and the PG num max. Or general ideas around how to work with metadata pools with the scale down mode. Junior, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. I guess the motivation behind this PR is because with the scale down mode, instead of if you're familiar with how the autoscaler works, it scales up the pool, the PG on a pool based on the capacity ratio. So the higher the capacity ratio, the higher it will increase the PG num. But with scale down, what we do differently is that we take into account all the capacity ratio of all the pools and see if there are one pool that is using more than other pools, we kind of give, initially we maximize the number of PGs, so we call it the PG complement, and that's calculated by multiplying OSD count, the number of OSDs, by the monitor target PG per OSD, which is normally 100. So therefore it kind of like gives a lot of PGs to all the pools, and you only, if one pool is using more PGs than the other pools, they will get like more PGs in that pool, and whatever is left, you give it to all the other pools that are not using as much. But the problem is that with the scale down mode, when you have a default pool such as device health metrics or like the .mgr pools, you will scale up the that pool by a lot because of how the scale down algorithm works. And if you wait for a bit and you deploy all other services, the first pool that you created and has the most PGs will start scaling down because the autoscaler detects that there are all other pools, so it needs to adjust to give the PGs the correct amount to the pools, and that can take a while, and that can be a problem. It can take an hour or more based on how much PG needs to scale down by. And so I think this PR kind of like tackles the issue of having too much PGs on one pool. So yeah. And I guess PG num max value would make it so that like it respects the pool respects the autoscaler respects the boundaries that is set, so it won't go more than like a certain amount, so that it doesn't cause the issue of like the time it takes to scale down, because when you're scaling down a PG, it's much slower than scaling up. Scaling down PG, you do it like one at a time, but scaling up a PG, you can do it like, I don't know, like many PGs at a time. So yeah. I guess what we're talking about is if we should impose like a PG num max, or could we do like a small or a metadata flag instead? And I guess if we look at the pull request, there's a discussion about it with Sage and Josh, and I kind of agree on the path that we could take in having like a small flag for any like metadata pools, so that we kind of in the calculation of scale down mode, we can prioritize that specific pool first, so that it behaves like a scale up mode. So it would only scale based on its capacity ratio, and then you subtract that to like the PG complements, the total PG that we would distribute among other pools. So yeah, so I can see how it fits into the calculation of the scale down mode. So I think I agree with your Josh's latest comment on the PR on how we kind of do it. I don't know if any other people has like thoughts on it.
Can you put the PR link in the chat, please?
Sure.
So, Junior, for folks who haven't followed the comments, can you summarize what the idea is that to have like different modes, like for smaller pools or pools that we know are not going to consume too much capacity, we just use a scale up mode, and for everything else we use scale down?
Yes. Yes. But
I mean, how are we making that classification, that small flag that it probably only applies to something like the default pool, right? The dot
yes.
manager.
So we still have to impose we have to still like, all the services that are not like Ceph, like other services that that has like metadata pools, we need to somehow incorporate like the flags into it when you create that pool, I think, in order for the autoscaler to detect if
So you're trying to say, like, when you say services, it's like, let us say an RGW based cluster. If there is a small RGW pool that we, so RGW when at pool creation would use this small flag and use scale up mode, and the data pools would do scale down.
Yes.
And in general, I'm like, these classifications make me a little nervous because it's almost using two different modes. And
right.
Yeah.
So in my thoughts, it would be like scale, like the profile of autoscaler is kind of like global. So I didn't want to have some pools that are like scale up and some pools that are scale down. It should be like all the same, like scale down. But with this like small flag, it kind of like adds to it only applies to scale down mode. So this small flag would only would help prioritize how you distribute the PGs, and how like each like the calculation of PGs will be created, like it will prioritize the pools that are small, and that will only scale up based on the capacity ratio. But it wouldn't like if you do like OSD pool autoscale status, it wouldn't say that pool is a scale up mode. So it will remain the scale down mode, and all the other pools are like scale down mode. It's just that the small flag helps prioritize like the calculation, so that we don't have the problem where it scales up too much with the scale down mode.
So why can't we achieve this with a max, a PG num max? So what you're describing as a small pool, if we have an upper bound as to how many PGs that particular pool can consume, would then that also solve? It's almost doing the same thing, right? So you may want to call it small, you may want to call it anything else,
right.
But the idea is to have an upper bound on these small metadata pools, or pools that we know are not going to need too many PGs. Is that a good?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like similar now that you brought it up.
Yeah, the reason as we brought up the idea of the flag instead of just the max value was that there are a bunch of other settings that we are often applying to metadata pools. We could make this more general than just the pgnum. Like applying things like the recovery priority that we have set by default in like different tools like creating RDW pools or CFS pools today set a few different values for the metadata pools. We could make those kind of a common thing that are implied by the small flag.
Got
We're
it.
gonna have
Like
to
it's a
update
profile.
every pool creation. Yeah, more or less. The other piece to consider, and it's a detail a little bit in the Etherpad there, is like the upgrade path. So I think the idea would be to keep everything in the like with the when you upgrade, keep all the pools with the current mode, the scale up mode, and then like document how to when you're turning on the scale down mode that you would want to set this flag on your metadata pools, since we wouldn't have a good way to do that automatically for existing pools, unfortunately. But if for new clusters, they could use scale down out of the box and set the flag on metadata pools that are being created for the places that we can change pool creation.
I wonder if a couple things. I wonder if instead of calling it a small flag, if it should be a scale up flag, like so the flag is actually what it controls.
Well, if we're talking about it being more than just like for auto scaling, but also for like recovery priority or like other things related to metadata, maybe more one that makes more sense.
Yeah. Okay. That was one thought. The other one was maybe it might make sense to flip this around, and so instead of having the special pools be marked special, have the bulk data pools that we actually want this scale down behavior, mark them like bulk, and that triggers the behavior. There are fewer of those.
There are fewer of those, but they're often created directly by users. Like for RBD, there's not an RBD command you run to create a pool, whereas for RDW or SFFS, those pools are often created all at once. So yeah, I don't know which way is best there. I guess from like an upgrade perspective, if you don't have a bulk setting, and we try to provide like profile of like recovery, prioritizing recovery, or the other pieces, we probably wouldn't want to do that to a bulk data pool. But if we had upgrade pools that didn't have the small flag, it means that those metadata pools wouldn't get increased priority if it didn't already have that set. I don't know. I don't really see a clearer.
Just when is this scale down mode intended to be the default? Is it already the default in Pacific, or do we revert that? And I can't remember when it was.
Yeah, we reverted it.
Okay, so maybe in Quincy or a later Pacific point release once all these other issues are sort of ironed out.
Yeah. Yeah. At this point, I'm not even thinking about a backport. I'm mostly concerned about what goes into Quincy first, and stabilize, and then backport. But yeah, maybe we should take a call about this before Quincy.
Maybe discuss it on the list. I think I would lean towards putting the burden on the these are the pools that should scale down versus the other way around, because it seems less likely to bite people in an unpleasant way. Like the worst case scenario, if a pool scales up instead of scaling down, is that some data moves as you fill it up. That's not a big deal compared to these very small pools generate a bajillion PGs and then have to very slowly collapse down on themselves. Like that Posi cluster has been working for days on taking up one of the early pools that has a bazillion PGs and slowly ratcheting down now that some other file systems have been created, and it's like it's a totally empty pool. It's like a total. It feels like a big waste. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess that's the big asymmetry. Like the scaling down is way slower than scaling up. So if we make an error in that direction, like because somebody forgets to mark a small pool as small, that's worse than if forgetting to mark a big pool as big.
Yeah, and things like RBD users creating their own pool. I think there is an RBD init command or something like that. I think nobody uses it, but it exists, and maybe we should just be like better documenting that.
Or we could also maybe piggyback on some of that, like application enable. Like for RBD, there's only one type of pool that they usually use. It's always a bulk data pool.
Yeah. Whereas
for like Ceph RDW, then it's a mixture. So it needs to be another setting.
Yep.
Talking about that pool creation part, the last time I looked, at least so we had added this flag called mostly OMAP or something for RGW, set the bias property for metadata pools in RGW, but that wasn't being exercised. So I don't know what the where the pool creation was happening, or like was it a different code path? But that is also another problem. We have the implementation, but if you're not using that code path, we use a different code path, then there's no point, right?
That's another thing that like we have pool creation spread around, not just within Ceph, but also other projects consuming Ceph, like Worker or Ceph Ansible, or probably Ceph ADM at this point, within Ceph at least. So we have to change each of those places to use these new flags. I guess the hope would be that if we have this new flag change in, because that's the main distinction we make is like between these small metadata pools and large pools, we wouldn't have to do that kind of change to everywhere we create pools in the future, because we'd be able to like add new things based on the existing flag.
So how does it like work if we were to flag only the bulk pool? So when a user creates a pool and they have to like manually set it, or is it like automatic?
I guess it would be like another pool property. Like it would be running like after creating the pool, they run a second command to set that bulk property on the pool.
Oh, okay.
Like we could probably add it as an optional argument for the pool create command too. That'd be a bit better since it would be atomic and we wouldn't have to worry about autoscaler kicking in between the two commands. Although I guess it's also a problem with the bulk mode in that direction too.
It was, I think yeah, it's been a real problem on Posi.
Yeah.
I think, but it's mostly because there's that other manager bug where it was making the pgnum make really big jumps without jumping the pgpnum. But I have an open pull request to address that now that I'm deploying today. But yeah, there are a lot of like commands and like rushing to set flags quickly or whatever, which is kind of annoying.
Right. Yeah, so maybe we could be thinking about adding more of those kinds of things to the basic pool create command as options then.
Yeah. Maybe just like a -- bulk would be.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess what's the conclusion for Quincy? I mean, like, do we go with the -- bulk flag with the scale up mode by default, or? Do we want to send an email to the list as well?
I'm okay with the dash bulk, and we can keep it scale up, and so instead of like having the profile to be like either scale up or scale down, just scale up, and then dash bulk would just do the same kind of like calculation for only the bulk pools. I think I don't know if it's too much for. I mean, yeah, it should be okay.
We can test it out on the LRC and we can do a larger scale test before Quincy there as well. But yeah, I guess it sounds like based on the existing experience, we should definitely make sure we do a scale test before changing the default.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Kiba. You have to build that Kiba cluster.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Anything else for today? All right. Well, thanks everyone. See you next month.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Wednesday. Bye.
Thanks.